Tonight we will get the reveal and with a bit of luck the patch notes, but before that happens I thought it'd be interesting to pick 3 hopes and fears for SSF in patch 3.28. Before we start, I want to talk about topics you typically hear in these videos, but I never cover, and I will tell you why. Starting with build balance or a build meta shakeup or even new skills. Basically any new additions or balance changes related to builds. I fully understand why this is important to people and I get why a still meta can feel bad. Plus I am in favor of changing up builds, ascendancies, the meta, it keeps things fresh. However, I am also fine if changes are not happening to build or ascendancy balance, primarily because I play whatever I want anyway and the meta doesn't matter to me, especially in SSF. I don't need to farm currency, I don't need to compete with anyone, I don't need to clear the game as soon as possible. There are very few reasons, in other words, that I need to have the strongest build out there to play the game in SSF the way I want to play. I have taken 3 off-meta builds last league and killed pinnacle bosses with them. I've completed the whole game several times in 3.27 with builds based on the roll of a wheel, and with so many skills and support gems already existing, I've never felt I'm out of build ideas or out of options to progress through the game again, and I'm not sure I ever will. Hence, build-related changes, I welcome them, but I'm not upset if the meta largely stays as it is, and so I never really have strong opinions about this topic, hence I usually skip any info related to build balance. Just don't touch my Guardian SRS GGG Dreamcore, better be wrong about that buff prediction. Similarly, I look at the loot mostly the same way. I care about loot a little bit more than I care about builds, but the things I realized from the whole ground loot discussion is that, well, first, Fopgun and Snap make excellent cases and very thoughtful videos, which can't be said for all those reactions. But second, in SSF I realized I don't consider ground loot and tile loot as separate entities, although I am aware they are. For me it's just loot, and in SSF I think it is much easier to get excited about loot, whether it's ground loot or tile loot, because it's really only loot that enables you to try out new builds or helps you progress your current build. Currency usually does very little in that regard. You need a baseline for crafting and rolling maps and stuff, but that is about it. So if that is the case in SSF, which it is for me, it matters less that loot is coming from the ground or from tiles as long as it is coming from somewhere. And I think in the last few years, loot in SSF has been mostly fine from my perspective, with maybe a hiccup here or there. It's not hard to sustain maps, get currency or upgrades for the most part, as long as you are willing to interact with the systems that provide those types of loot, and I think that is part of the beauty of solo self-found. Also, typically in solo self-found, last league excluded because of the Genesis tree, ground loot the first few days is more impactful, as you may be fishing for rares, still fractured or field gear, specific uniques that are build enabling, and more often than not you'll get those from ground loot or just random map encounters. Rarely in SSF are you fully specced into league mechanics and juicing those on day 2, so the random aspect of loot that is described as missing in ground loot in Fob's video is just a bit less noticeable in SSF. However, similarly to the build balance, I do hope the issue is addressed. I think it is better for the game overall, and I think he has excellent points, once more, him and Snap. I just won't really be upset if it's not fixed, as I don't feel it has a major impact on how I enjoy SSF currently. Okay, with those 2 big topics out of the way, let's dive into the 3 hopes. The first is Tier 17 rework. This is something the devs already mentioned, of course. We know it is coming, but I really hope it is coming this league. Tier 17s, the layout of those maps, and the punishing modifiers on those maps are for me some of the most frustrating things in SSF, to the point that most of the time I don't run the content at all. Very few builds can have a fun time in those maps, and while in solo self-found there's not that many reasons to do Tier 17s for the most part, unless you want to farm scarabs or uber boss fragments, I think it is still bad that most builds need to spend 40 chaos per map rolling the modifiers before you can even attempt them and have somewhat of an okay time. And given that I tend to play a bunch of off-meta builds the last few leagues, you can imagine that Tier 17s have not been kind to those builds. More specifically, my hope is that the implicits from Tier 17s are removed. I really want all Tier 17 modifiers removed pretty much. Barring a few, there is almost no fun or interesting modifier in there, and then maybe they can include a few of the more original Frisia modifiers instead, or just make monsters harder, tankier and do more damage without the need for those ridiculous tier 17 modifiers. I do think that Frisia endgame, not in terms of idols, but just in terms of those random map modifiers that we got, was a lot more interesting and fun than tier 17s. And if Adziri would sometimes show up witnessing my tier 17s, or the Maven, that one isn't really too bad, or I would get a Corrupting Tempest or a 100% increased character size, I think those modifiers have way more going for them than applying 3 curses and petrification statues. I also hope, but I don't think it will happen, that the maps are changed, the layouts. Why can't we have tier 17s roll on normal maps rather than those terrible layout maps that we have now? Jungle Valley tier 17, and then the boss room is just one of the tier 17 bosses like Katarina or the Trinity. I mean, thematically, sure, it makes a bit less sense, right, to have the Spider Queen replaced by the Trinity, and then also of course just use the Trinity room, right, the boss room, as I imagine the bosses are balanced based on their own rooms, so you would have to somehow port those rooms into tier 16 maps, and maybe just do that for maps with dedicated arenas to begin with, like Jungle Valley or Lookout or Beach. But wouldn't you simply prefer breaking a bit of immersion for the sake of fun and player agency? I have high hopes for a serious overhaul here. Second hope, remove King's March. It's great in solo self-found, right? Free currency, recombinator. But out of all the league mechanics, King's March is the one that feels mandatory to use, just like the Genesis tree did. It is the one that requires still a lot of setup to do, and it is something that requires constant upkeep. And these 3 things, in my opinion, are bad for the game and are bad for SSF. I don't want to farm for gold just to keep my mappers running and my city running. I don't want to constantly have to interact with all of the different King's March mechanics, but I have to because they're so strong. Or I don't want to save the guys from a bandit or a pirate, inject more resources, send out ships, loot map rewards, insert 36 new maps, buy all the workers. It's a whole game in itself, and it takes away from the actual game, as you are just doing boring administrative stuff. You are not actually killing monsters. If I could join my mappers, sure, now we're talking, but that is not the case. King's March is significantly different than other league mechanics that require resources. Hopefully we can agree on that. Sure, Heist needs contracts and markers, but the resource to gameplay ratio is still rather healthy there. Plus, you actually play Heist. In King's March, you're just standing around, doing nothing apart from some administrative tasks. And Delve, to give another example, needs Sulfite, sure, but you run 3 maps and then you have full Sulfite and you can spend another hour delving. In my opinion, you really can't compare this to how King's March works. And recombinating, don't even get me started on how terrible that is. That is the most anti-fun crafting system I have seen in any ARPG almost, and I almost never use it. It's completely unnecessary either to have this in the game. So again, I hope they can step over the possible lore consequences, given that King's March exists in PoE 2, and just burn King's March down to the ground by some Mirage miracle. I think it would be very healthy for the game and make other mechanics a lot more fun and viable. Third and final hope, I hope they make getting the 3rd and 4th Void Stone a little less annoying. This is mostly an SSF issue, of course, and while in the past the grind towards all the Elder and Shaper fragments has received a lot of quality of life, such as making the fragments rerollable using Harvest Juice, I still dread the moment I have to respec into Maven's destructive play and farm dozens of Guardian maps just to get all the fragments. A good number of those bosses are slow, have multiple phases, so that definitely isn't helping in farming. It is clearly very old content, but also the content just really isn't all that fun. I'm fine running everything once, Maven Witnessed for the Maven Invitations. I think that is reasonable and fairly enjoyable in terms of progression, but the progression towards Uber Elder is super outdated at this point. I hope with the endgame rework they will find a more interesting way to either get to those bosses, or find an entirely new way to get 4 Void Stones, or who knows, maybe Void Stones are a thing of the past. Which brings me to the first fear. Fear GGG will change something that is either working or that I like. And the first one is the Atlas progression. Now, while I've included 2 hopes that are closely or entirely related to Atlas progression, I do really enjoy the overall Atlas progression otherwise. Yeah, maybe one more thing except the unique maps, maybe. Those are pretty bad too, come to think of it, in SSF. But okay, what I mean is, the way we get to go from tier 1 maps to tier 16 maps, getting more Atlas passive points, having to add more modifiers on the maps to complete those Atlas bonuses, gradually getting more and more league mechanics available to us, I think it is an excellent system with very few flaws. I've listed all the flaws basically in the other sections. But if those are the only issues, which they are in my opinion, with the entire endgame mechanic, then the endgame is really fucking good. I fear that if GGG makes a significant overhaul to the Atlas progression, it may not be as good as it is today. And that fear is fueled by the seeming removal of Carrack reports, Horizon orbs and Harbinger orbs, all currency that lets you reroll maps. Getting rid of maps and replacing them with something else, like a Waystone in Path of Exile 2, or even something completely different, that is scary to me honestly. That could mess up your endgame progression, which I love in SSF. Another fuel for the fear is just looking at the endgame in PoE 2, it's not exactly great. Second fear, the Genesis tree. I am not all that surprised it stays in the game. I made a video before the announcement saying that I could see that tree being there for the generation of Thyworm uniques, but I fear the provisioning branch may not get nerfed or nerfed enough. I'm aware some of you don't agree, but I don't see how you can look at the current Genesis tree provisioning and think it is not completely broken. The loot you get from that tree invalidates pretty much anything else in the game, especially in SSF, where normally you are expected to tackle different content before you can craft something that has mostly tier 1 affixes. But not only that, the gear it provides is so good that you only need the tree pretty much to provide you with gear, which allows a somewhat decent build to conquer the entire game, including pinnacle uber bosses. It is that strong, and I've done this on multiple builds in 3.27, and that's not a good thing. It's not good for the ground loot, as we have learned, but also for the relevance of other crafting mechanics. Because yes, as some people pointed out, you can still use other crafting mechanics to min-max gear, but I am personally not in the business to min-max characters. That is not where I derive my fun from. I am in the business to kill bosses and complete the game and farm maps on several builds, and just this tree all by itself allows me to do this and allows me to skip 80% of SSF I would otherwise engage with. And that is, in my humble opinion, a terrible thing. So yeah, a fear here is definitely that this tree is still broken in the next patch, meaning Breach 2.0 is a mandatory mechanic to run as it provides insane upgrades, and I don't think League mechanics should be like that. It would make the last two League mechanics that got added to the core game, King's March and Breach 2.0, mandatory to run in SSF, which isn't exactly a great development. Final fear, related to that last sentiment, it is more of a meta fear. I don't mean the build meta or the game's meta, I mean taking a meta view on Path of Exile, like a helicopter view, looking at this patch as a whole and fearing that the patch is going to be underwhelming, feeding that narrative that there is not enough focus anymore on Path of Exile 1. I really hope that Settlers and Breach, which I enjoyed enough as leagues but overall just weren't great leagues, are now followed up by a banger league. But I fear if it's not the case, the sentiment surrounding Path of Exile 1 is going to change significantly. And for the record, I think Mercenaries was an absolute banger, it's just that nothing of that really made it into the core game, so we're not enjoying that league right now. Whereas I think two of the leagues that, were not that great, such as Settlers and Breach, those are making it into the core game, so, that's not great. As they say, once, meaning Settlers, is an incident, twice, Breach is a coincidence, but 3 times that would be a pattern. I fear Mirage could be the pattern. Personally, I'm really not that negative, by the way, about the future of Path of Exile 1, but I don't like it if the whole content meta surrounding the game gets negative. It is bad for everyone involved, regardless if it's true or not. It is bad for the devs because where is the motivation in that situation, right, if that is the response to what you're creating? It is bad for players because they have the impression that the game is going downhill. Again, it doesn't matter if it is true or not. And it's bad for content creators because negativity gets views, and I don't want to engage with that sort of negativity and have it show up on my screen all the time. I'm sometimes a bit of a drama enjoyer, like the High Guard situation has produced some excellent content, but PoE 1 isn't a game like that. PoE 1 is an amazing game, a proven game, and I want people to be able to enjoy that game any way they see fit. But after the Settlers timeline and Breach in the end being underwhelming for most people, PoE 1 needs a win. Again, I'm not forgetting about Mercenaries, right? That league was a win, I think, but hopefully Mirage is also that win. But if it looks like an oasis in the desert at first, where the hungry gamers could go to lessen their thirst for good ARPGs, but it turns out to be a Mirage with an ironic league title, then we're not going to be in for a great time. Either way, time will tell. I am typically hopeful also on the future of the game. It is hard to really mess up such a good game, and I believe the devs are still very passionate about it, but it is hard to juggle between 2 games, I'm sure. I think that makes a lot of sense. I hope you all have a fun time with the reveal. It's always exciting, I think. My plans are to make several SSF videos before the league starts, and then once the league itself starts, I've taken 1.5 weeks off for your enjoyment and my enjoyment, so that should mean more Path of Exile 1 content if all goes well. Let's hope Mirage isn't a Fata Morgana, but an actual oasis. Thanks for watching and making it to the end. Don't forget to like and subscribe, it really helps. And with that said, love you all, see you soon, bye bye.